In a bid to entrench far-right policies on the ground, Israel has approved new measures affecting the occupied West Bank, easing land access for settlers and expanding Israeli authority. Moves Palestinians warn amount to de facto annexation. The decision comes at a sensitive moment as diplomatic efforts continue to push forward a ceasefire agreement in Gaza, and just days before Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu meets the US President Donald Trump in Washington. So how will these measures further deepen the challenge of establishing a Palestinian state, and what do they mean for any remaining prospects for peace? I'm Henny Sif, and this is Think Tank.
Our world is becoming unhinged.
Israel's Security Cabinet has approved new measures easing land purchases for settlers in the occupied West Bank and expanding Israeli authority over Palestinians, days before the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu meets US President Donald Trump. According to the Arab Weekly, these new measures include scrapping long-standing rules that barred private Jewish land purchases in the West Bank, as well as expanding Israeli oversight in areas currently run by the Palestinian Authority. Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich said the move aims to block the creation of a Palestinian state. The West Bank is territory Palestinians seek for a future state and is considered occupied under international law. While President Trump has ruled out formal annexation, his administration has not acted to slow settlement expansion. Analysts say the moves may also bolster Netanyahu politically ahead of elections later this year. Meanwhile, Egypt has strongly condemned Israel's latest measures in the occupied West Bank, calling them an illegal step towards annexation. Egypt Today reports Cairo said the moves violate international law and UN resolutions. 7 other Muslim countries also issued condemnations, while Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas called the measures dangerous and illegal, warning they amount to de facto annexation. The Palestinian presidency said the decisions aim to legalize settlement expansion, land seizures, and the demolition of Palestinian property, including in areas under the Palestinian Authority.
Israel has taken a step that could deepen its grip on the occupied West Bank, approving measures that make it easier for settlers to buy land and expand Israeli enforcement powers over Palestinians. Israeli media report that the new measures ease restrictions on Jewish settlers purchasing land in the West Bank, while granting Israeli authorities expanded enforcement powers over Palestinians living there. The territory is central to Palestinian hopes for a future independent state, yet remains largely under Israeli military control, with limited self-rule by the Palestinian Authority in some areas. The measures include scrapping decade-old regulations that restricted private land purchases by Israeli citizens. They also allow Israeli authorities to take over the administration of certain religious sites that expand oversight in Palestinian-run areas, including environmental, water, and archaeological enforcement. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas condemned the steps as dangerous and illegal, warning they amount to de facto annexation. In a statement, he called on the United States and United Nations Security Council to intervene. Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, a key figure behind the moves, was quoted as saying the goal is to bury the idea of a Palestinian state. The move comes days before Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu meets U.S. President Donald Trump in Washington. While Trump has ruled out formal annexation of the West Bank, his administration has not acted to curb accelerated settlement expansion. With elections looming, Netanyahu has doubled down on his long-held position that any Palestinian state would threaten Israel's security, a stance now reflected in policy changes on the ground.
To understand the repercussions of these measures, we're joined from Kentucky by Professor Ihsan Al-Khatib, the political science professor, and from Washington by Dr. Fadi Hilani, the senior fellow at the National Council on U.S.-Arab Relations. Gentlemen, welcome to Think Tank. Professor Al-Khatib, how do Israel's new measures in the West Bank change the legal landscape for Palestinians and settlers right now?
Thank you for inviting me. It just gives more Israeli settlers more tools they can use to persecute the Palestinians and steal their land. And it entrenches the Israelis more, gives them more control over the West Bank, so making the two-state solution more and more unrealistic every day. And I think the real problem is that Trump signaled that outright annexation is not acceptable. Therefore, by inference, everything else is okay. And the Israelis have gotten the message that basically they can do everything else, but outright annexation is not acceptable. It's just building one step after another that the Israelis are building. It's the nature of this government, the Israeli government, controlled by right-wing religious extremists. And they are moving toward the greater Israel, entrenching control over the whole land. And they have no interest in peace whatsoever. Under normal circumstances, Israel will be kicked out of the UN. Actually, the UN ambassador in 2024 shredded the UN Charter. Normally, a country like that will be, it's shredding international law, international conventions, UN obligations, literally and figuratively shredding them. Normally, it would be kicked out of the UN, but you need the US to be okay with that. That would never happen. Therefore, the Israelis continue to do whatever they can to make life harder for Palestinians and make it easier to steal their land and make a two-state solution impossible.
Dr. Hilani, many international statements and condemnations have stated that these new measures do amount to a de facto annexation. How true is that? And is it, as Professor Khatib mentioned, a step towards greater Israel?
Good morning, and thank you very much for having me. They do amount indeed to de facto annexation, but the Israeli government will still try to phrase and translate this move not as a formal annexation, so that they will not appear as in direct opposition to President Trump's will and promise that there will be no annexation of the West Bank, as he promised the Arab leaders just a few days before the phase one of the Gaza deal was, of course, agreed on. So what we are having here is very much the Israeli government is trying to send a message that there will be no path forward from Gaza or from elsewhere to a Palestinian statehood. And that is a promise Benjamin Netanyahu and his government are obviously trying to deliver to their public, that we are a strong government, we are working independently from the United States on the one hand. Let's not forget also that we are in an election year for Benjamin Netanyahu and his government. So it's very important to this government, number one, to indicate to their public that they are working independently from the United States on the one hand, and on the second, they are still keeping their promise that there will be no path for statehood to the Palestinians. Of course, as the international law indicates, and the Oslo Accords as well. These are zones and areas A and B, so in principle, the Israeli government should not have a final say on these territories. But there is much intention from the Israeli government, as I mentioned, to send a message to the public that the Gaza agreement, which Israel is not an essential part of, the United States has been the mastermind behind this. They want to send the message, as I said, that although they were not the essential part of the Gaza deal, but they are still working hard towards preventing any likelihood of the establishment of a Palestinian state. And what they are doing now is amounting to a de facto annexation, but still, as I mentioned, they will not provide this as formal annexation, so they will not be in a clear and direct opposition to the United States.
Professor Khatib, how might scrapping the decades-old land restrictions affect the prospects for the two-state solution? You've mentioned that it really does rule out the two-state solution. Now, given this widespread condemnation, what effective role then should the UN and the international community play in responding to these measures and maybe try and keep the two-state solution alive?
I mean, the UN has made this position clear. The UN Security Council, the American veto has stopped the world from doing something about Israeli aggression and all violations. The US has used its veto more than 50 times to protect Israel from the consequences of its actions. In the General Assembly, it's clear that Palestine has many supporters. Almost all countries in the world support the Palestinians and the two-state solutions and ending Israeli aggression. But by the end of the day, the Security Council runs the show, and the American veto is always ready. And look at the International Criminal Court. They charge the leaders of Israel with international crimes. The Hague, the World Court has decided for Palestinians as well. So the world is doing what it's supposed to do. And many countries have condemned what Israel is doing, but the key is that the Israelis have to pay a price for that. If they're not paying a price at the UN level, at international organizations level because of the US, then these are sovereign countries, Germany, Britain, France. They should have the Israelis pay a price for that. They condemn, but by the end of the day, they're not making the Israelis pay a concrete price for that. Just the condemnation by itself is not enough. But the world is on the Palestinian side. The UN is on the Palestinian side. But the nature of the UN is that American veto and the American power. But the US is holding back and letting the Israelis do these things. Now, it's not a final, by the way, what the Security Cabinet voted on, the full cabinet has to vote on as well. And then you have the military commander has to implement this as well. So it's not a done deal. The US can still pressure the Israelis as to the decision of the Security Cabinet.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Helani, do you see these decisions further destabilizing the already fragile ceasefire in Gaza, or maybe even spark wider regional tensions?
No doubt. The idea of the Gaza peace deal was that it's going to give the Palestinians a say on the territories which they exist in. Of course, talking here essentially about Gaza and the West Bank. And this is why the Arab leaders got a promise upon the signing of the peace deal that there will be no annexation in the West Bank. So when we are thinking about the West Bank, we cannot separate that from what's going on in Gaza. And in my opinion, this move towards establishing or enforcement Israeli measures in the West Bank is done in a significant time, not just before the visit of Benjamin Netanyahu to Washington on February 11, but also 10 days before the first meeting of the Gaza board peace, which is going to be on February 19. So what is going on from the Israeli side is inseparable from what the US is doing, and in accordance with the Arab leaders as well, to try to enforce stability in Gaza. The message of the Israeli government is that there is no Palestinian statehood and that by no means enforces stability and peace, whether we are talking about Gaza or the West Bank. So there should be, of course, moves towards trying to diffuse this situation in that sense. And any thinking that what's going on in the West Bank will not affect what's happening in Gaza, I think is a misconception. So the way towards peace starts from Gaza, but it also goes through the West Bank. So any Israeli enforcement mechanisms happening in the West Bank will have their effects, of course, in Gaza. And if we are talking about disarmament of Hamas as a hurdle towards peace in Gaza, this mechanism of establishing Israeli authority in the West Bank will be another hurdle. And in fact, it can be taken as an excuse that disarming Hamas may be, of course, not a very good measure towards peace because Israel is enforcing its settlement in the West Bank. So somebody can say this can happen in Gaza. So if we are talking about disarming Hamas as a move towards peace in Gaza, we will talk also about not having enforcement mechanisms of Israel in the West Bank as another essential point for peace.
Mm-hmm. Professor Khatib, you've mentioned that these measures do affect the possibility of establishing a viable Palestinian state. You've mentioned that international statements of condemnations are not enough. Maybe the US needs to apply a bit of pressure on Israel. Do you think that the US would actually do that? And if they don't, is there any other way to stop or mitigate these measures from affecting the possibility of establishing a Palestinian state?
The only reason Palestine is not a full member of the UN is the US veto. Otherwise, Palestine would be a full member of the UN today. It has immense support. Palestinians have immense support. They're very popular. A lot of people support their cause. They have immense support at the United Nations. I mean, very few nations vote against them at the General Assembly. It's a just cause. International law is with them. On their side, the international community wants a two-state solution. It had made that clear more than one time. The whole Arab-Israeli peace is premised on the two-state solution, even from day one when President Sadat went to the Knesset. He made it clear to the Israelis that, hey, you can have peace with everyone in the region, but if the Palestinian issue is not resolved, then we are back to square number one. But the problem is that Ben-Gurion said the Bible is our deed to the land, from the river to the sea. The Lee Code says from the river to the sea that it's a Jewish land, Jewish sovereignty. Mm-hmm. Now, I disagree with Mr. Halan as to one thing, the issue of the connection between the West Bank and Gaza. I think Americans have been able to sever the issues. And the whole attention of the world has been on Gaza because of the genocide. The genocide has to be stopped in any way. Therefore, the Arabs and the Palestinians agreed to sever two issues. But the issue for Hamas now and resolving the issue in Gaza, Hamas will say, look, you want us to give up our weapons. Look what the Israelis are doing in the West Bank. Mahmoud Abbas is doing everything the Americans want. But look what the Israelis are doing. So it has made the issue of the weapons of Hamas harder. It has made the Gaza issue harder because Hamas can say, look at the West Bank, look what the Israelis are doing. So again, they are reconnected now, the two issues. But the Americans actually dealt with them as if Gaza has nothing to do with the West Bank at all. Now, the two-state solution, the Arab countries, they want peace. And even there is a justification for it in Islamic tradition. The Quran says, if they incline to peace, they should incline to peace. And that's the justification that the Azhar gave actually at the time that Sadat had the peace with the Israelis. But the Israelis don't want peace. That's the problem. The Israelis, Netanyahu himself, I watched him say that our role model is Joshua. And if you look at the Old Testament, what Joshua did with Jericho, basically it was, by today's standards, is the genocide, ethnic cleansing, and all that. So I mean, I don't want to judge the past. I mean, more than thousands of years ago, and we use the label from today to condemn people in the past. But
yes.
If it was okay, like hypothetically at that time, it's not okay now. But Netanyahu was saying that we are guided, this is our role model. And that's why they're infusing religion and religious extremism. And Israel Shahak, who's a Jewish chemistry professor that passed away a number of years ago. He said that there is the elements in the Jewish tradition that are very hostile to non-Jews, and he said there's something called Nazi Jews. These people do not have any, they don't put any value to non-Jewish life, and they will do anything possible to achieve their end. He warned. He said that what's happening in the West Bank is very dangerous.
Yes.
What's happening in Gaza is very dangerous, but nobody was listening. And even President Jimmy Carter said, peace, not apartheid. He said what Israel is doing in the West Bank is not good, and it's not good for Israel even. But unfortunately,
well,
the United States is not being firm.
The current U.S. President, Donald Trump, will be meeting Netanyahu, and it's a very much anticipated meeting. Do you think in this upcoming meeting they will be discussing matters that would influence the U.S. policy towards the West Bank? Will they be discussing these measures? Will they be discussing the technocratic authority that will be taking control and managing the situation in Gaza, and also the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank? Dr. Helani.
I think they will be discussing all these issues together. But let's remember that the main file possibly that is going to be discussed in this meeting is going to be Iran. But no doubt they will discuss also Gaza, the West Bank, and all these measures. I think President Trump is going to discourage Benjamin Netanyahu from any measures that are going to formally be seen as annexing the West Bank. And in my opinion, Benjamin Netanyahu is going to say to the president that these are not formal annexation measures as much as trying to enforce Israeli control over certain territories. So there will be some kind of discussion here, no doubt. But in my opinion, what plays a major role here in countering these Israeli measures is the role that not the UN can possibly play here, because it's also tied and restricted by the US veto. But let's remember that President Trump listens very well to the Arab leaders. Let's remember that he changed many times his plans for Gaza over the last year because of pressure from Egypt, from Saudi Arabia, and from other Arab regional partners. In my opinion, the Arab leaders can play a major role here in convincing also President Trump that any on-the-ground changing of realities, of facts, taking into consideration that if logistic changes happen on the West Bank, these are faster than diplomacy. At the end of the 5 years, if we have elections in the Palestinian Authority and reforms as the United States wants and calls for, these reforms may happen after a lot has changed on the ground to an extent that a Palestinian statehood will be very unlikely to happen. So if the Arab leaders convince President Trump, and as I mentioned, he has listening ears to those leaders, that could play a very important role in having the US administration on board, that these measures are very dangerous and are very much counterproductive to President Trump's plan to have peace in the region. We are talking about Gaza and the West Bank here as very inseparable. So will these discussions be in the core of the talks between President Trump and Netanyahu? Yes, I believe so. But again, let's not forget that the Arab leaders have a very important say here. And in my opinion, this has to be made clear to the president.
Professor Khatib, Minister Smotrich has blatantly stated that these moves are designed to bury the idea of a Palestinian state. Now, if the goal is to make a Palestinian state impossible, what is the plan for the millions of Palestinians living there already?
Smotrich and Ben-Gvir made it clear what Palestinians have to do. They have said, they've spoken, they've written on these issues. They said that as non-Jews, whatever rights they have, a function of what the Jews give them. It's a Jewish land, and they are on this land. If they fight the Jewish sovereignty, then they have to be killed. And if they're not happy with the Jewish sovereignty, they should leave. And they should get whatever the Jews give them. It's Jewish sovereignty over the land. God gave the Jews this land, and they have to take whatever the Jews give them. I mean, they have said that, they have written that, they're clear about it. So they're putting them in an impossible situation. The Arab side wants peace on the basis of the two-state solution. That's from the beginning of the peace process, the American peace process. But unfortunately, as as the Palestinian historian Rashid Khalidi always said, the Americans are dishonest brokers. If the Americans had been honest, there'd be a state now. Because these settlements have been expanding under Republican administrations and under Democratic administrations. And the U.S. uses all kinds of language to condemn unhelpful, all kinds of terminology when actually these settlements are illegal under international law, and they're not helpful in resolving the conflict. There is a problem, the problem is that the Jewish lobby in Washington, the Jewish lobby is powerful. And the American presidents generally are weak as to the Jewish lobby. Therefore, the Israelis keep creating facts on the ground and make the two-state solution impossible. Now, is it inevitable that there'll be no Palestinian state? I don't think anything is inevitable until it happens. It just requires the will of the American president. I mean, Eisenhower forced the French and the British and the Israelis to withdraw in the 1950s when they attacked Egypt. So the U.S. is a superpower. It can. The American president can take a stand if he wants, as long as he's willing to pay the price for it. But I don't see Trump doing that anytime soon.
Dr. Helani, President Trump has previously expressed skepticism about the formal annexation, but by opting for these administrative changes instead of a formal declaration of sovereignty, is Netanyahu threading a needle to keep the U.S. on his side while satisfying his far-right coalition at home as well?
It's an attempt, of course, to not to directly object the United States, especially that President Trump said clearly that there is no annexation of the West Bank. So it's not going to be formulated by any term soon that this is a formal annexation. However, these changes, these encroachments, if you will, are very much step-by-step annexation of the West Bank. So what I can see from the actions of the Israeli government is they are taking steps towards annexation without formally announcing that this is annexation. And the only purpose for this is not to object directly to the United States. However, these stepwise measures do threaten facts on the ground that by this process, will we reach a stage where the West Bank is by de facto annexed to the Israelis. So this is why I think, as I mentioned in my previous comment, that this is the time for Arab leaders to step in and to make it clear to the United States administration and President Trump that these are really dangerous steps towards the annexation of the West Bank.
Yes.
Let's remember that both Israel and the United States at this stage oppose the Palestinian statehood, but both have their different reasons. Israel for ideological purposes, whereas the United States for reasons related to the Palestinian Authority. So if the Arab leaders interfere at this stage and make it clear that by the time there is a partner from the Palestinian Authority, but this will not be happening if the Israelis continue on their process of the annexation of the West Bank, that could be made clear to the United States that this process has to stop at this point.
Professor Khatib, why is Israel moving now to control the archaeological and religious sites in the Palestinian areas? Is this about history or about land or about getting on the nerves?
It's all of it. And as politics as well, they have elections coming up and they want to show their voters that they are asserting all kinds of rights on Palestinian land, and that this Jewish land. And they want to take ownership of the history of the place and the future of the place, and show that they run the show in every way. Any kind of semblance of Palestinian control and sovereignty, they want to take it away. And it's very popular, actually, with the Israeli public, what they're doing. That's why they're doing it, because they have elections and it resonates with the Israeli public. Therefore, it's just part of a scheme of controlling the land and claiming it's for the Jews only, and whoever is there either under the ground, dominated by the Israelis, or kicked out of the land, and they're making it clear every day.
Dr. Helani, now these religious and archaeological sites, they were controlled by the Palestinian Authority. You spoke about the Palestinian Authority. Now, the Israeli officials can actually intervene and demolish these buildings. What does this say about the power of the Palestinian Authority on the ground?
There is much doubt about what the Palestinian Authority can do on the ground. And for many viewers, the Palestinian Authority is weak and corrupt. And adding to this kind of enforcement which the Israeli government is doing adds to this weakness of the Palestinian Authority. So it adds further weakness to the Palestinian Authority in front of its public and the international community. This is why, when I said that the United States is opposing the Palestinian statehood at this moment, not for ideological reasons, as the Israeli government is, but for the purpose that this Palestinian Authority is seen as weak and not as a partner, a viable partner for the United States to combat terrorism, for example, or to assure the Palestinian sovereignty on its ground. This is why, in my opinion, it's not enough to have our partners only convincing the United States that these measures are countering peace efforts, but also it's high time for the Palestinian Authority to reform itself and to frame itself to the United States and the international community as a viable partner. Only by these measures, in my opinion, it can gain the support of the Arab leaders who also view the Palestinian Authority as weak, by reforming itself, by having elections, by reproducing its image to the international community. I think that will be very much important to counter these Israeli measures, whether by working with the United States or the Arab leaders themselves.
Dr. Fadi Al-Hilani, the Senior Fellow at the National Council on U.S.-Arab Relations, and Professor Ihsan Al-Khatib, the Political Science Professor. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us here on Think Tank. Still a lot to be done. There's a very much anticipated meeting between the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump. Still a lot to be done by the international community, the Arab leaders, and maybe some U.S. influence on the implementation or stopping the implementation of these measures. That's all the time we have for this episode of Think Tank. I'm Henny Saif. Thank you for joining us.